I hope everybody having a good time at this conference so far. Hope y'all got to attend the mentorship panel earlier. But welcome to this session, technical session 2A, which is titled Industry Updates. In this session, we will have two speakers. And the first one will be Ms. Katina Lear, who is Assistant Director of Strategic Communications for the Georgia Department of Transportation. She has been with the Georgia DOT for more than 10 years and has worked in the communications field for nearly 25 years. Katina currently leads the day-to-day operations within Office of Strategic Communications, assisting with strategic delivery of communication efforts across the state. She formerly has been a public involvement specialist working with environmental justice communities and air and noise analyst, a lead graphic designer, writer, editor, and photographer at different phases of her communications career. Katina graduated from the University of Alabama, where she earned a bachelor's degree in communications with an emphasis in photojournalism, and was a founder member of the women's soccer team when the program started again in 1994. And you can find Ms. Lear on LinkedIn at K Lear Photography and Design. Please welcome Ms. Katina Lear.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you for having me. As I was, I guess the last couple of days, believe it or not, I work in communications, but I really don't prefer giving presentations. I know that that sounds odd, but it's true. So the last couple of days, I've been kind of mulling over what I wanted to say to folks here, and particularly what would I say to engineers, right? Typically communications and engineering, they do go hand in hand. Sometimes folks are a little wary of communications folks, but I would say at the end of the day, what we do is also engineering. We engineer trust, and we engineer storytelling to talk about our projects and our plan development process as we move through developing projects and those sorts of things. So again, I think we have a lot more common ground than differences. It's just how you look at it. So let's see here. All right. So I love quotes. You guys don't see that. I do. Let's see here. Oh, all right. That is not advancing. All right. I did move to the right. And you guys don't want to see me do the electric slide, so see how we can. Let me see. Let me look at that. There you go. All right. I'm also an IT person. There we go. Okay. So as I said, I love quotes, and I'll just read this for you. I'm sure you can read it on the screen as well, but it says, listening is not understanding the words of the question asked. Listening is understanding why the question was asked in the first place. So again, as I go through this presentation, since 2018, the department has really strived to, not only did we rebrand our identity, we completely changed our logo structure, lockups with our logo. We also changed how we talk about the department and how we talk about projects and programs that we are putting forth to the public. All right. So this is a little bit of infrastructure by the numbers. I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to see. If you would like your own personal copy, you can go to our website. And this is out of our accountability investment report that we just published recently, and it's online. So as you all know, GDOT is responsible for planning, constructing, maintaining, and improving the state's roads, bridges, interstates, and we also work with local transit agencies, the State Road and Tollway Authority, municipalities, and other organizations to improve mobility and safety across the state. So as you can imagine, our stakeholders are at the center of all that we do. And so whether we're promoting safe driving habits or alerting members of the public about projects and coordinating with stakeholders, we also are encouraging public participation as well. So very quickly, as I said, we rebranded in 2018. And really what we wanted to start doing was focusing on the why we do these projects, why it's important for us to look at data and understand how that data is driving our decision-making processes. Again, if you can define the why, then you can get folks involved and you can get them understanding and wanting to know more about what our process is and how we move projects through the pipeline. Not just project specific either. It's around our programs as well. So you can see here on the slides, engaging with the public is not just a product of the environmental process. It's needed at all stages of program and project development. Transparency of the process is so very, very important. And let me just say, I know from a public involvement standpoint, years past, you wouldn't necessarily have folks that would want to talk about projects in an essence to feel like you're persuading them to decide one way or the other about a project. And so our standpoint is you just put the facts out there. You put the data out there, you let those things speak for themselves, and then you talk about what those data points are and why it's important for folks to understand the decisions that we're making and how we're making them. So I mentioned our brand. You can also get our brand guidelines and standards on our website as well. If you have not seen them, again, check that out. Feel free to reach out to anyone with the agency and they can provide these. You'll see that this was done back in 2018. We currently are looking at, we are currently working on providing an updated brand guide standards. Here also we have our vision and mission and core values listed. And again, the purpose to have brand guidelines is to really set that foundation of who we are as an agency and how we talk to folks. And how we talk to folks and who we are is very, very important to building that public trust. All right. So quickly, a little bit about the role of strategic communications. As you can see, we identify and utilize maximum ways to enhance the department's image with all of our internal and external stakeholders. We want to, again, make sure that all of our agency folks are singing from the same sheet of music. We all have the same messaging. We all have the same talking points, if you will, and we're being proactive and we're being responsive. And again, we want to, with our brand standards, we want to maintain and establish our creative control of the department's many communications, print, broadcast, and digital outlets and products. So those branding standards and content are super, super important. Again, when folks are working on behalf of the agency, it's really important at the end of the day, the folks who are working on behalf of the agency aren't going to be the ones that get the call. It's going to be the agency. So again, we all want even folks working with us to have a hand in helping us carry that message. And then our communications team will provide counsel to internal stakeholders, staff, including PMs, project delivery teams, and consultants in advance of public involvement efforts. So very quickly, this is the PESO model. Some of you might be familiar with it, but it's basically the paid media, earned media, shared media, and owned media. Again, leveraging this type of communications and outreach strategy allows us to garner greater visibility. We approach our communications efforts from a very strategic standpoint. We try very hard to make sure that we're not leaving any communities behind, that we are doing our due diligence and researching upfront and prior to some of the things that we have heard. Many times, as you all know, particularly construction projects and the plan development process doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. In some cases projects are put on the shelf. They've been worked on, for years, then they're put on the shelf for years, and then they're pulled back off the shelf to move forward because of funding or other issues. One of the things that I like to remind project teams is to go back and look at the previous public involvement efforts that have been done, go back and look and research prior articles that have been written to get an understanding of the history of how those projects started, how they originated, in many instances and what the thought was then. Not to say that the thought's going to be the same now. We all know that people are moving in and out of areas around the state, but it does give you an understanding of knowing what's been said previously and how those things have been handled. Again, it also helps with the trust and the transparency, because if the public knows that you saved all of those things, you took their information, you took their viewpoints and their perspectives, and then when you go back out to the public, say it's been a decade or more, and you already have those listed in your frequently asked questions, the public's like, oh, okay, so they did hear me, they did document this. And then you can, again, it helps to build those relationships so that you're not starting at square one. So as you can see, our continuum here of public engagement and public involvement, it doesn't just happen in the pre-construction phase. It should be happening in planning and carrying all the way through open to traffic and maintenance and operations. Again, that is our goal and has been. It's just now we're talking about it much differently. So as I get into this is how we're talking about it now. So as you guys can remember, we used to do public information open houses, and I apologize for these being small. We used to do public information open houses, public hearings. I think all of you have seen it. You walk into the room, you're handed a handout. It's got 25 pages. You're asked to right then and there read the entire thing and then go ask lots of questions. That's not realistic, right? And it shouldn't have been realistic then. So now what we do is, and this came from a directive of our commissioner back in 2018, 2019 timeframe, we talk about projects differently now. These are our introductory boards. So from left to right is how you're going to be flowing through here. But in a nutshell, what this is, it's in an effort to provide the members of the public we kind of view it as a exhibit. You walk in, you have these boards, you can look at these boards. As you can see, the boards themselves have very little text. So what we're hoping to do is ask folks why you're here. That's the first thing. Second thing is we're going to tell them what we're proposing to do. And then the third thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about what's known. So again, you're going to provide crash statistics. You're going to provide data that is starting to formulate why you're doing the project that you're doing. Okay. And then again, pictures are helpful. You know, these aerials that folks are having to look at, I'm sorry, most of the time folks don't look at aerials, right? So if we can give them not a bird's eye view, but if we can give them on the street level view of what they're actually looking at, the intersections down in the right-hand slide at the bottom, those are actual, obviously, intersection photos showing some of the congestions, showing some of the safety issues. Again, it's really taking a project and looking at it from a different viewpoint and really trying to look at it from a member of the public who lives and utilizes that area every day. I know when I worked in environmental doing air and noise studies, it was very rare that I would actually go out to the project location. I sat at my computer, much like most do or did then, and I looked at aerials and I tried to determine, you know, based on the noise readings that my computer program was spitting out, you know, if those were valid or not. Sometimes we would go out and actually do the readings. But again, I think putting yourself in the community, them having an understanding that you know what those intersections actually look like, how folks are having to navigate them, it makes a huge difference. So again, there's a little bit more of what you know about the project corridor. And again, you know, I did touch on this, the benefits of the project, but again, it's what we're proposing with the project, what we're hoping to solve, the solutions, the concerns that are existing. And then to close that loop, you need to tell folks what happens if we don't do the project. A lot of times we talk about the no build, right? People don't understand what the no build is. You got to explain it like this. We go in now, we are asking folks to use census data. We're asking folks to look at the growth that's expected over the same traffic time span that you are gathering the traffic for to do your traffic studies. We're asking them now to put that data into the what happens if this isn't built. We all know the growth is going to continue. So lay it out there. Let them understand that you have, as professionals, looked at all of the scenarios and everything that's needed to properly tell the story, to properly have the narrative that we all know because we're professionals, but we got to break that down and we need to have it digestible to folks that live in the areas. Okay, so as you all know, there was a little thing called a pandemic that happened. And I say that lightly, and I apologize if anyone was affected by the pandemic. We all were. But that did change our perspective on how obviously we talk with folks. Obviously, we couldn't go in person for a very, very long time. Luckily for the department, we had already been going in the direction of looking at ways we could also provide virtual meetings for folks. So we were ahead of a lot of other states. And again, one of the platforms that we have chosen to utilize is our GIS hub. We utilize their storytelling and their story mapping pages. That is how we have built out our public involvement virtual platform. Again, up on the left-hand top, we have also created virtual, I guess they're 3D, 2D rooms that you can actually go into. I'm sure some of you have seen those. If not, please feel free to check those out. Pretty exciting that we were able to get that up and off the ground so quickly. In our visual presentations as well, I'm sure you saw in the boards that I showed you, we are using iconography. So again, in an essence or effort to cut down on the amount of text that is being showcased on our slides. And it's something very quick. Folks can take that reference and they can quickly understand what we're hoping to do with that iconography. We also currently utilize Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We had TikTok, and we all know what happened with that. Basically, we were told to cease and desist, so that is what we did. But that allowed us to shift a lot of our video content to Instagram. If you have not checked out our Instagram page, I implore you to. Our social media specialist that we have right now is phenomenal. She is fantastic. And she does a really great job at bringing some comedy, but also creativity to sometimes a seemingly pretty boring and frustrating process of construction. So again, I would ask you to check that out. And then we also refreshed our website. Completely built a brand new website from the ground up. Again, that really was our final piece in completing our rebrand from 2018. So again, our focus was to appear like your typical state agency. We didn't want to, necessarily have folks feel like it was hard to find things. You couldn't navigate anything. Now it's very different than what we had previously. And then our newest, undertaking was we've launched a podcast. We air that podcast once every month. We've had 5 now. So again, it's pretty great content. We just did one on our Transportation Investment Act. It just celebrated 10 years. So we did one on that. Our very first one featured our commissioner talking about all things not only construction related, but also he got pretty personal about what his career trajectory was with GDOT. So again, it allows us to extend that voice, tell our stories differently. So I advise you to check that out as well. All right. So Edward mentioned that I have worked with environmental justice communities in the past. Again, everyone knows and everyone has heard about the Environmental Justice 40 initiative. Again, environmental justice should have and always been part of the conversation. Again, we need to be actively looking at communities that we're impacting. There are tools now, much we didn't have necessarily those tools back when I was doing environmental justice studies, when I worked on the environmental team, but we have them now. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be using those tools to identify those communities, those hard to reach areas, thinking about different ways to reach out to those folks, meet them where they are is so, so very important. We are no longer at the phase of we just need to be somewhere and expect them to show up, right? I mean, we need to be actively seeking these communities out and having and bringing them to the table. So I mentioned a little bit more about our strategic communications team. As you can see, I'm not going to go through all of these, but our team does a tremendous amount, not only for projects, but also the agency as a whole. Currently, right now, one of the things that's probably not on here is that we are helping our human resources department we're working hand in hand with them to market for agency. And again, that is something that we have not been accustomed to. We weren't doing that a couple years ago, but there's no reason why we can't market ourselves and talk about what our agency does for the taxpayers of Georgia. So I implore my team to always stay curious, to always want to understand the why. And if they have questions, guaranteed at least 2 other people might have the same questions. So let's find the answer and let's put it out there and educate folks in the process. So best practices and lessons learned, I mentioned this, but research, do your research. It doesn't hurt you to have an understanding of what the history is. Again, it's so, so important. Everyone wants to be heard. They want to be seen. They need to be recognized. Again, there is nothing wrong with that, and we should go that extra mile to make sure that that's happening. You know, again, in that research, you're analyzing and understanding your stakeholders, you're understanding what motivates them, and you're providing those communications and outreach tactics to meet them where they are, as I said. And again, the market research is key. It's a key strategy, looking at industry trends, looking at best practices, but all while obviously adhering to your federal, state, and local expectations. And then the last thing I will say is, you know, plan strategically, develop those strategies and tactics across multiple channels. Don't assume that because you did something on one project that's going to work on another one. It's just not. Every one of those projects is going to need its own effort of involvement and research. Now, that is not to say that what worked on one, you can't take components and apply it to those particular projects. But again, you know, it really does require a thoughtful approach, looking at folks and understanding what the needs are. And then, you know, again, you want to make sure you're utilizing multiple channels. Often, I know for our agency in our district offices, we have some district offices that the folks in their communities use Facebook more, and they don't ever use their Twitter channels. So we feed most of our information to Facebook. That's fine, as long as the information is getting out. You know, that's what's important. And we don't want to try to find people if there's not an audience there, right? It doesn't make sense. You're putting resources in an area that's not going to be seen. So again, just really trying to think through the pros and cons of your decision-making process. And as I said before, you want to make sure you tailor your communications tactics to the target audiences and the groups. And then the final piece is you want to make sure that you're monitoring and measuring your outreach efforts. Test those approaches. Did you reach who you wanted to reach? Again, I think sometimes where some of the pitfalls can occur is that folks are like, well, you know, we put an article in a newspaper, we posted it on, you know, one time on LinkedIn, and okay, we checked the box, we're done. That's not sufficient. There's not a real measurable result there. So again, I would advise you to really think through what your target is prior to implementation. And I'm going to close out very quickly with a quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I strongly, strongly believe that in my core. I feel like if you take the extra time on the front end and you make those connections and those relationships with folks, it matters. Because what happens is that you begin to change perceptions of, what we typically hear of, you're just another government agency, you're going to come in and do whatever you want to do. Well, if you spend the extra time and you actually have conversations with community members and you make those key connections and they begin to see you as a person, because we all are, right? We're all humans. We all have the same, thoughts, fears, all of those things. And sometimes just taking that little extra time to make a connection that you didn't necessarily think was needed, sometimes it is. And it goes a long way in helping what your outcome is. And the last thing I will say is, working for the department truly is a rewarding experience for me. And so I try to, every opportunity that I have to talk with someone, to email someone, to call them, to interact with them on social media, I try to think of the fact that now they don't only know me, but they also know who I work for. And now they have a different appreciation for GDOT employees and for folks that they see working on the side of the roads and for the folks that they know are out, clearing roads during inclement weather, those types of things. I mean, those things matter. And so again, I want to thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you listening and turn it over to Brian.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Katina Lear? Talk to the mic.
Sure. Yes.
On a standard project, design for the supply information and layouts to district communication or API, all that. What would you like to see better or more for the designers that we have to ask for when we're doing our negotiation on it?
It's a great question. And thank you for asking. I, for years, have been trying to figure out a way that communications efforts could get scoped into contracts. So I would certainly talk with probably OPD and the project managers on GDOT side. What I personally would like to see, and I know that some of the consultants in the room are probably like, oh, that one just fell. Are probably like, oh gosh, Katina's on this call and we've done something wrong and now we're going to have to do, 10 more hours of work that we didn't plan on. And I apologize for that. But we are working on trying to develop a standard. It's funny that you bring this up because we just had a communications meeting on Friday. And one of my employees was like, you're such a bulldog. And she was like, but I mean that in a good way. And she was like, you just know how to ask for things, kind of, what the requirements are. So I think even from a communication standpoint, we're going to be working on some standardized language. We have been working with OES to try to get them kind of on the same page as us, but a lot of times what I would like to see is just some of I know that there's a plan. It's like a plan design that OPG has released. They have a document that talks about, what needs to be on the displays and how it needs to be displayed when they go to the public. So there are additional conversations happening, but anytime that you all have questions about how to scope that communications piece in, because I agree with you. I mean, I think depending on the project scope and size, I don't know that you need to do, 20 things. But then again, we've also come across projects that are very small seemingly, and then there's a huge outcry because people just don't want their parking taken away to have bike lanes, So again, there's lots of little nuances that can happen when the public starts to catch wind of projects and if they feel like they've been heard or not. I don't know that I have an answer for you. And I don't know that if I feel like I just kind of went in circles and I haven't landed the plane, but so it's more of a scoping question, right? Right. Agreed. So if you have those additional questions, call me. I can definitely try to help navigate some of those. The other thing I will say is I know one of the newest things that has been asked is on detour routes. There is a request from the commissioner that and I just happened to be in a meeting when he said it. And so then I was like, oh, commissioner said this. So I need to make sure that I tell as many people as I can. Well, what he is liking for project teams to do now is if there is a detour, he wants you to pick a point A and a point B. Doesn't matter if, 5 people travel that, but if it's the longest point, he wants you to go ahead and calculate out those time differences, right? Instead of saying a detour is going to be 5 extra miles, he wants to know the time of that 5 extra miles. What I've told folks is look at your worst peak traffic hour and calculate for that. At least you're giving an approximate time difference, time change to the traveler who lives in that area. And so again, it goes back to trying to put yourself in the folks' shoes that live in that community and how those impacts are going to affect them. Let's do this. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, moving on to Mr. Brian Robinson. He is the Deputy HR Director for Georgia Department of Transportation and oversees the areas of employee safety, classification and compensation, employee relations, and HR field services. He possesses a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Berry College and a Master's of Public Administration from the University. Worked for GDOT for over 16 years, holding a variety of positions in human resources and district administration. Brian began his career in the Office of Intermodal Programs before moving to Human Resources, where he has served as a recruiter, HR analyst, employee management relations specialist, district administrative officer, and deputy HR director. Brian serves as a regional representative on the AASHTO Committee on Human Resources and is a member of AASHTO Subcommittee on Transportation and Workforce Management. Now, please get up for Mr. Brian Robinson.
Thank you. And like Katina said, thank you all for having me. I was joking with someone when I was asking them about this particular conference. They're like, oh, you've never been to the winter conference. I was like, I work in HR. Like, oh, so have you ever been to the summer event? I was like, no, I work in HR. It's only been recently that engineering groups have really started reaching out to HR to talk about workforce issues as it becomes harder and harder seemingly to find and keep good people. So I'll do my best. I do have a slideshow that I'll I'll go through with you today, and I'll try to stay behind the podium. I don't do a good job at staying in one place here. So I may kind of skip around for the sake of time. Really just want to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about primarily some workforce trends, and then mainly what the department is doing in response to those. Just a quick highlight. How many of you are responsible in any way, shape, or form for hiring or staffing or managing in any capacity? So a good majority of you. I can say one thing we've seen is a change in both employee and applicant expectations. I'll talk a little bit about average tenure and job, the increase in competition. And actually, we work very closely with Katina's team in ways to try to reach out. I know she talked today about projects, but we have similar efforts in how we reach out and try to find applicants for our positions. Remote and or hybrid work environments, and actually you can't click on the link because you don't have the presentation, but there was an interesting article that came out recently, and it talked about specifically in civil engineering, a declining number of civil engineers and civil engineering graduates coming out of schools at a time when we need more engineers. So it creates kind of a double whammy there. Real quick before I move on, prior to 2020, how many of you worked remotely on a regular basis? Okay, y'all kept raising your hands. I said 3 at first and it ended up 8. Fast forward to today, how many of you or your teams work remotely? How many of y'all were prepared to switch overnight to working remotely? Okay, so a big change when you talk about trends in the workplace. And quite honestly, if I have one slide that talks about the why we do what we do in terms of looking at our workforce, it would be this one. So the chart on the left, I know y'all are engineers and hopefully love data. The chart on the left is our head count over time, and you can see which direction that is headed. So we are a much smaller organization than we have typically been. And when you contrast that with the chart on the right, just focus on the blue bar. The blue bar is the percent of our workforce that has 10 years or less of experience. So if you notice back the first series of bar charts there is 2009. You can see that percent of the workforce was fairly small. We had a pretty senior staff, pretty large tenure. You fast forward to today, it's almost 60% of our workforce has less than 10 years of experience. So you couple that with a much smaller workforce, really kind of speaks to challenges when it comes to training and development. And if you look here at the bottom, in 2022, voluntary separations accounted for 88% of our turnover. I don't know if that's similar to many of you. That's a combination of retirements, people moving to other organizations, some people just deciding to quit and drop out of the workforce altogether. But pretty large percent there, 88% was voluntary turnover. So what do we do in response? So as an agency, again, we have about 4,000 employees. We engage in workforce planning. We rely on key partnerships for recruitment and retention efforts. We try to look at ways to streamline our hiring and onboarding process. And finally, focus on, and not finally, but last on the slide here, is focusing on employee engagement and development. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but workforce planning really kind of looks at where you are today as an organization, gets at where you want to be as an organization moving forward. I know from a departmental standpoint, we have needs not only today that are different than they were years ago, but even looking into the future with EV legislation that's coming out and just a variety of things that we see on the horizon. The needs of the types of staff and the types of engineers that we bring on board is continuing to change. And we need to know where we're going from a workforce standpoint as an agency to know how to address those, whether it's through recruitment or employee development. Again, we try to, everything we do is to make sure that we are ready for the future of work. So a big part of that is focusing on talent development. So if you'll recall the slide I shared a little while ago, not only are we much smaller, but we have a lot less tenure. That means a lot of employees now are being asked to step up into lead, into management roles much sooner than has historically been the norm. In some cases, some of our jobs where it used to take someone 10 or 15 or 20 years to kind of reach that level, we are now asking some engineers who have 3 and 4 years of experience to step into those roles. Is that common in anyone else's organization where you're seeing people take on leadership roles much earlier than normal? And there's a saying in HR that people don't usually leave organizations, they usually leave managers. The relationship between the frontline supervisor and the employee is oftentimes the most important relationship that there is in an organization. So we have focused a lot of our training and resources on frontline supervisor training. And that's not just the technical skills. That's not just how to do a performance review. That's not how to do design work. A lot of that focus has been on soft skills, how to find out, how to talk to your employees, how to deal with difficult situations. We've also recognized, so prior to COVID, we had about 150 people who teleworked out of 4,000. You fast forward to today, it's over 1,000 employees who telework with some regularity. So much like Katina talked about, their open houses moving virtual, we've also had to move a lot of our training to virtual and hybrid platforms. And there's pros and cons, and we could spend all day talking about pros and cons of virtual versus in-person versus hybrid arrangements. But in many cases, it has at least allowed us to reach more people. Now, if the engagement is there, I can't always say, but it has certainly allowed us to reach more people that would not have normally been able to access some of those training efforts. And then primarily for our civil engineers, because we have a contingent of engineers, obviously, at the department. We also have a very large workforce that is manual labor. There are maintenance crews, our hero operators, utilities work, a variety of things. But for this specifically on civil engineers, we kind of lump our recruitment efforts into 2 categories. And those are activities designed to fill positions immediately, and then activities designed to build and improve the pipelines of applicants into the future. So this gets at reaching back out to middle schools, to elementary schools, to high schools, trying to encourage kids to continue to pursue STEM careers. And I don't think that's just a GDOT effort. I think a lot of our partners in the transportation industry have recognized that need. I'm actually pretty excited. One of our recruitment managers, she has a call this week with Lego, trying to work with them on how we can kind of start very early with children getting interested in those types of concepts. So I'm excited to see where some of those efforts lead into the future. One thing that has also changed, and I was sharing with someone before this started, was when the pandemic hit, a lot of schools quit allowing people on campus. So it got much harder to go out and recruit engineers on campuses. We've returned to campus, and I'll show how that looks different today than what it used to look like when I was a recruiter a couple years ago. So recruitment events now, obviously we do the traditional career fairs, just like everyone else does. How many of you attend career fairs as part of your job? That can be tough, right? You're standing there for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. There's 50 other organizations all trying to vie for the same attention of the same applicant pool. It can be a tough day. So one of the things we've done is we've started looking for opportunities to get on campus outside of the big career fairs. So those are going to STEM nights at various schools, attending various organizations, whether it's ones like this or ASCE. One thing we've done are what we call campus takeovers, and that's where we've had engineers who spend multiple days on campus. For example, we did one earlier in January at UGA. We actually had engineers teach as guest lecturers in 6 different classes at UGA. So that was an opportunity not only for us to get to talk to students in a little bit different of an environment, but we were also able to kind of apply some more real world background to some of the theoretical stuff that they were learning at school. We attend meet and greets. We offer up the ability to do resume reviews. So even if they don't choose to come to GDOT, we try to help students with their resumes. And one thing we did was we were out at a college campus, and one of our bridge engineers was there, and some of the students were having a test coming up, and they're like, man, I can't understand what we're learning about when it comes to the structural issue. So we said, well, we'll phone a friend. If you've got a question, we gave them the contacts for some of our structural engineers and said, hey, if you can't figure this question out, not during the test itself, but if you're studying and trying to figure out how to solve this, call one of our engineers and just talk through and let them kind of help you. And that seemed to go over very well with the students. So here's what that looks like in person. So I realize it's kind of small. The top left here, that was actually at UGA. So UGA has a newer civil engineering program. So that was GDOT night at UGA, and that was our commissioner. He showed up thinking there was going to be like 15 or 20 students in a room, and it was over 100 students showed up for that night. So that was pretty cool. And you can kind of see throughout here, there's some pictures of various engineers going out to those events and just sitting down and talking with students. Actually, one of the ones here in the bottom is Sue Ann Decker. She was one of the panelists who spoke earlier about the mentoring. So she's one of our engineers who travels around to various campuses and talking to students about engineering. There's one here with the Instagram in the middle, and it's actually an employee who now works for us. This is her son that she had brought to one of the events at night. And it's funny because as we were working with her to offer her a position, her son would often want to get on the phone and talk to the engineer as well about the bridges that they were building. So hopefully another future engineer down the road. So I'll kind of jump through these somewhat quickly. Obviously, I see a few familiar faces. So some of you are familiar with GDOT's training program for engineers. So I'll say this, we try for engineers to focus, yes, on the technical aspect of engineering, but we've really focused a lot more as well on the mentoring and the soft skills and how to interact with others in a workplace. One of the really interesting things that we did a couple months back, we invited all of the engineers that we've hired since 2020 to come and talk. And it was really just sort of an opportunity. We had a program that you could download on your phone, and we would ask questions and they could respond, and all their responses would show up on the screen. And it was a really cool opportunity to hear directly from them about why they chose to come here. And we didn't ask that in like a mean way, like, why are you here? It was, why did you come to GDOT, and why have you stayed, more importantly? So it's really important, I think, in the mentoring session, I know they talked a lot about, engaging with your supervisors, but I think it's good for the organization to hear what's drawing employees to their organization and what's making them stay. And I'm going to go through these pretty quick. When Sue Ann mentioned our mentoring program, it's called GDOT Connect. So that is kind of what she was referring to there. Rapid is within our roadway design. So it is designed, as I mentioned, we have a lot of engineers who are asked to step into leadership and supervisory roles much earlier than usual. And that's what the Rapid program was designed to do. Stands for Roadways Accelerated Program for Individual Development. I'll leave up here some of the mentoring topics that they discuss during that. Some of these are engineering terms that I'm not going to embarrass myself by pretending I understand what they mean, but hopefully you all can recognize that, like I said, it's not just strictly the technical nature of it, but we also get into things around dealing with conflict, dealing with customers, presentation skills, performance metrics. So as you can see, as part of this, they also, when they come back, the people who go through this have an opportunity to present back to the Office of Roadway what they think could improve the office itself. So not only are they having a chance to learn, but they're having a chance to provide that feedback to the offices. Again, Bridge has very similar efforts. And as you can see here, for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and wrap up. I was always been told with public speaking, no one's ever been mad at anyone who finished early. If I keep you here late, and y'all may not agree. Katina thinks people don't like or look side-eyed at communications. You should work in HR when you have to do these things. So we've actually had some success between a combination of one of the biggest things when I talk about success is trying to change that trend in our headcount. Since the end of the fiscal year, going up into, this was captured at January 1st. If you recall, our trend has been going down for a number of years. We've actually increased our full-time headcount by about 140 since July, which may not seem like a lot, but it's a pretty, got to start the trend reversal somewhere. One of the interesting things we've done, we utilize Indeed.com. They have a virtual hiring platform. It used to be submit your resume, somebody would screen it, they would call you, schedule a time. This, we set up once a month virtual interviews. Applicants go in, pick their own time slots. We've already arranged the time slots were available. They pick their own time slots. You show up that day. We can go through, if we have multiple recruiters and multiple subject matter experts, we can do upwards of 60 or 70 interviews in one day, which in previous cases, we do 4 or 5 a day. So that has been a huge effort, and just looking at different ways to reach our audience. So with that, I'll stop as we are approaching